one way of looking at all of the juxtapositions, if you like, of our faith, of our liturgy, life and death itself. We have Paul in the second reading, death, where is your sting? God and man in Jesus Christ. These are all these, in a way, paradoxes, not contradictions, but paradoxes. They evade our powers of reason to fully comprehend, and they invite meditation, contemplation on the mysteries they contain. There is a very practical message in today's gospel, isn't there, about hypocrisy? And so often we do, as human beings, enjoy judging others. It can be a relief, a distraction from our own faults, failings, fears and anxieties to blame other people, to see in them all these terrible faults. If only they'd get their act together, life would be so much better for everyone else, wouldn't it? There's a pleasure in that, a fairly dark one, but a very common one. And here Jesus is naming it to the people around him, probably with a bit of humour. We don't think of the Gospels as being laugh out loud funny, but there is a bit of humour in this. You have a log in your own eye, but you complain about the speck in the others. There's also a sense here too where we see again that the enemy of, I'll say, Catholic spirituality is Puritanism. Puritans love to see black and white, good and evil, clearly separated and delineated, and to expunge or purge out those who are considered evil. It's attractive because it's this dynamic really of projection onto others, one's own fears. And it's a very dangerous way to live spiritually, but also in a society. We can look for scapegoats to put all of our fears and anxieties on, despite the log in our own eye. It's a very common way to try and achieve stability in a group, is to blame external aliens, foreigners, etc. So that's something we need to be constantly aware of. But in our tradition, I want to suggest to you the paradoxes that make up our faith and life generally, the limits of our reason, and our faith in those things that are so hard to understand, these sacred mysteries, can produce something that's missing, I think, today more than ever in our Western Catholic tradition, and that's a sense of the tragic. And when I say a sense of the tragic, I don't mean melancholy. It often gets, I think, confused with that. If you look at the history of our art and literature, music, tragedy was seen for many as the highest form of our art, because it captures something of this paradox of life. The desire for deep, true meaning. After all, if you don't have a deep and true meaning, you can't have a tragedy. You can only have comedy at best, or absurdity. But when you believe that there's something profound and deep at the heart of all things, that God has a plan, he has created things out of love, you and I, for love, then the reality of the world's sin and brokenness takes on a tragic sensibility. We don't live in some kind of absurdist tragicomedy. Life is not meaningless. Irony isn't really the key to understanding, endless irony. It's actually tragic. The world does have tragedy abounding. Just read the papers. Of all the doctrines of the church, probably original sin is the one that's surely easiest to believe in. You just open the paper, or if people still open papers, I do. You know, watch the news, look at your phone. Tragedy abounds. But once again, the paradox, despite the existence of this real evil, hope abounds. Hope abounds in the gospel. There are good and Christian people resisting evil. The other very important point about a tragic sensibility, which is why I think it's so Catholic, is that this business of blaming others as evil and ourselves as good falls apart. In tragedy, usually, as you know, the main character is deeply flawed. The word in Greek for the tragic flaw in Aeschylus and what have you is the same word as we see in the New Testament for sin, hamartia. It means missing the mark. Doesn't mean they're not aiming for the mark, it means they've missed the mark. And normally the tragic hero is tragic because they don't realise what they're doing until too late. There's something complex about the psychology and spirituality of the tragic hero that's true of our own selves. We're not all good, we're not all bad. We're made from good for good, but therein lies the tragedy of sin, to miss the mark, to deviate from our true nature, to go down into dark alleys, cul-de-sacs, and then have to realise again God's love and hope abound. So that means we can't judge others too easily. And of course the injunction is not to, and we heard that last week in the same Sermon on the Mount. But it's so difficult for us not to, because it feels so good. But if I realise that I am a sinner and I've experienced God's mercy, not as some abstract idea I read about, but in my own heart, in my own bones, in my mind, in my soul, all that goes into making a person, if I've experienced God's mercy in that, then I want to share that with others. We have the same message again and again in the Gospels. Don't judge. Share mercy and love. Doesn't mean we can't discern good from evil. In fact, we have to. But let's not fall into the puritanical trap of separating it out as if it's easy. Like the tragic figures of literature, you and I are a mix of good and bad. We miss the mark, but we're born to hit the mark. But then we realise, like the tragic hero, really, that we can't do it on our own. Life will draw out of us bitterness, resentment, or something more beautiful and noble. But it'll be because of God's grace acting in us, that groaning of the Spirit in all of us. That's what will free us, not our own attempts, petty attempts to save ourselves. Only God can save, only God can be God. But that doesn't mean we live in some fairy tale of zippity-doo-dah. Life is sad for many people and everyone suffers. But that's not the whole story. But we hold both of those realities in a paradox. And here in this sacrament, those paradoxes are drawn out, shall we say, with an intensity in the God-man who gives his life that you and I might have life. Surely the greatest paradox.